My name is Lina Khmenianidze and I represent Human Rights Education and Monitoring Center. This statement addressing to the special need to protect social and economic rights in Georgia has been jointly prepared by EMC, PHR and GAILA. At the beginning, I will start with the work and employment, which is one of the most violated rights in Georgia, expressed in the high rate of death and injury of workers and widespread labor exploitation in all economic sectors. 2 months ago, the Parliament of Georgia adopted a new labor code and established a fully fledged labor inspection. Despite these positive changes, labor legislation still does not contain a minimum basic labor guarantees, and labor inspection is characterized by a massive shortage of resources. At the same time, the lack of basic social guarantees for workers, especially for informal workers, became one of the biggest human rights issues, especially in the light of COVID-19 pandemic. There is no real minimum wage in the country. We don't have unemployment benefit or insurance schemes. In this context, we have 3 key recommendations: to enhance labor inspection with adequate financial and human resources in order to implement labor legislation, to introduce a basic social protection guarantees for workers such as real minimum wage, unemployment benefit or insurance schemes, and to introduce a national action plan and strategy to formalization of informal economic sector that will be taken into account the needs and interests of informal workers. Now I will move to the right to housing, which is one of the most problematic issues in the country. Despite the scope of the problem, there is no any strategy, action plan, coordination mechanism, or proper legislation to fight against homelessness. And this hard situation is even complicated by the massive lack of social and housing services. Every year, hundreds of Georgian families face eviction. In addition, there is no proper legislation on evictions which will take into account even basic standards of the right to housing. During the pandemic, the government of Georgia declared a national moratorium on evictions, which was a positive step. But as pandemic ends, we know that we will face massive waves of evictions that will affect hundreds and thousands of Georgian families. With this in mind, we have 3 main recommendations: to elaborate a national strategy and action plan to cope with the homelessness that will take into account the needs and interests of homeless population of Georgia; to elaborate a new legislation on evictions which will take into account the basic international standards of the right to housing; and to expand national moratorium on evictions beyond the end of the pandemic till the new legislation on evictions enter into force. Detailed information of our recommendations and observations will be on the website of UPR Info. Thank you very much for your time and attention.